Hey everyone, welcome. This is a special conversation. We are talking about being the best guest you can be and what you need to do before, during, and after a show to make sure you maximize your use of that time. Because if you're going to spend the time recording an episode, you might as well get the most out of it.
Definitely. And podcasting can be such an important channel for you, for your brand, and repurposing that asset, your time, everything that you say through that is a great way to get the most out of there. Let's talk first a couple best practices about being a good podcast guest. What can you do to be the best podcast guest?
To be a great podcast guest, you need to think about the before, during, and after. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. Let's talk about what you need to do to prepare to be an awesome podcast guest. Then we'll talk about what you do to actually be that podcast guest. Then we'll talk about how to fight off that imposter syndrome and be the best guest you can be. We'll talk finally about what you need to do when the show goes live to make sure you get the most impact out of that episode you appeared on.
Talk to me about what you need to do before the podcast to be a great guest.
There are 4 things you need to do to prepare to be the most amazing podcast guest you can be. First thing, learn the podcast you're going to be on. Learn the podcast. What does that mean? Do I need to listen to an episode? Yes, you do. Why do you need to listen to an episode? Well, first and foremost, you want to know the energy, the feel, the style of the show. Is the host full of energy? Is he crazy, going to challenge you left and right? Or is it the most amazing host asking these deep and introspective questions? Get a sense for the host before you get on the show. You'll feel very familiar with them. You'll know their style. You might even smile when you hear them ask the favorite question they always ask. Listening to the show in advance gives the host the sense that you're coming to bring it. You're not here to goof around. Your time is valuable. Just as you'd expect them to research you, you're researching them. There's nothing like the start of a relationship by looking into the person you're going to be meeting with, hearing their style, how they like to ask questions, finding out, are they going to interrupt you? Finding out how they like to interview people. This is going to help you understand what you need to do and be able to tailor your answers and your engagement to match not only the host, but the audience as well. The fastest way you can learn about a podcast is to join a prep call about the show. So if you get invited, don't say no to that. Definitely accept. Get a chance to know the host, get a chance to know the show, and definitely learn the audience beforehand. If the host doesn't tell you who the audience is, make sure you ask, who the hell is listening to this thing? I want to speak to them. Prep calls are amazing. I have a video. You can check it out here. Knowing what your audience is listening for can make you shine on that interview. The second important thing you can do to crush your podcast interview is to identify your key story and takeaway from the episode. Key story, what are you talking about? Well, a lot of people talk about the key message you want to get across on a podcast. But guess what? People don't remember messages. They remember stories. So think about what that message you might want to be is, and then translate that into a story. So when it comes to creating your key story, understand the audience, the questions the host's going to ask, and then think about what story would relate your key message to this particular audience. It's probably a story you've told before. You might tailor that a bit to the audience from what you learned on the prep call, from what you learned from step 1, learning about the podcast. Take that key story, practice it a few times, and be ready to answer. Once you've got your key story and message, and you've tailored it to the audience, think about creating 5 to 7 talking points. These are things that either support the key message or address particular questions your host may ask. Create a list of things on how or what to do in order to tackle that key message. The best thing you can do when your host takes a deep dive into your key message and your key story is to tell them, you've got a list. Hey, there's 5 things I really have thought about here in this situation. Or to really solve this problem, here are 5 things. Or where do I start? I have 5 steps in order for you to prepare to be on a podcast. Just like this recording has steps, do the same thing. Mirror what we're doing right here, right now with your guest preparation. Have a list, 3 to 7 things that you can talk about that can really support your key message. Finally, most important, when you're doing this preparation for your show, don't script. What? Don't script your answers. Write bullet points. But Casey, I love scripting my answers. Please don't script your answers. There are 3 reasons that you don't want to script your answer for a podcast interview. First and foremost, don't script your answer because you're going to sound like you're reading it. People can tell when you're reading your answer and it sounds inauthentic. It sounds like you didn't actually come up with that answer. Who came up with it? I don't know. Did your friend Clarice come up with it? Somebody came up with that answer and it may or may not have been you because it was written earlier. It shatters the diegetic world of the podcast interview. What does that mean? It means you're breaking the illusion of a conversation. What does it mean? People hate it. It sounds inauthentic. Nobody's got time for that. Do you listen to podcasts where people read to each other? I don't. Nobody wants to hear that.
If you're reading, everyone's going to be able to tell. It's super obvious. Even if you think, oh, I've read this in front of a mirror a few times. If you've got the script in front of you and you're reading it directly, it's going to be obvious. And no one really wants to hear that, because if they want exactly what you've written, they'll go to your blog. They'll go check out your LinkedIn article. They want to hear you. They want to hear the real person. And it's obvious that they're not getting that when you're reading a script.
Dude, that was beautiful. Did you read that?
Thank you. Yeah. No.
Everyone can tell when you're reading. It sounds inauthentic. Whatever Sam just said. That's amazing.
At that point, why don't you have just a robot read it out using something like Descript or any other AI tool? Where's the value?
You might as well have Siri read it to you. The other reason for not scripting out your answers is that it immediately creates this imposter syndrome. If you're a good writer or even a halfway decent one, and you start writing out an answer to a question that you know in advance, it's going to be pretty good. You're going to be able to perfect it, tailor it, and do a great job of just nailing that question. But if you script it, you're going to create the situation where whatever you answer is never going to be as good as the question you wrote out, unless you're reading it. And we already know we're not going to read the answer word for word. So don't set yourself up for disappointment by scripting out the answer. Write out bullets so you can speak to them. That's exactly what we're doing right now. If we wrote this thing out, we'd be freaking out and talking to you about on a teleprompter, but we're not. Don't script it out, because you'll create an expectation that you'll never be able to meet. And no one will be able to tell on the video that that's what's happening, but you'll know, and it'll get in the way of your creation process. Finally, the last reason you don't want to script is that it kills the chemistry. I thought we were talking. I thought we had a moment. I thought we were sharing a moment here. You, me, Jerry Maguire, having a good time. No, it's all gone now because I'm looking over here. People can follow your eyes. They know you're not looking at them. The host can tell you're not looking at them. The host can tell you're not even really there. You're reading something. And instead of having a conversation with a friend, we're having a very formal interview. And guess what? That just kills the chemistry. It kills the moment. And then a lot of the fun, natural follow-up questions won't come from that. When you kill the chemistry, it stops the dialogue. It stunts the relationship. And the follow-up questions will tend to be flat.
Yeah, it stops the conversation dead in its tracks. And if the audience thought that you were a real person that was relatable and, someone that they actually wanted to learn from, that's gone. That illusion is shattered.
You read. I know when I host my podcast and a guest starts reading, I hate it. And guess what? I either tune out or I get really angry. And then neither one of those things is good for your host to do when you're on a podcast with them. Hosts hate it. Don't do it.
Even Joe Rogan, one of the best podcast hosts, was getting pretty annoyed when Neil deGrasse Tyson stopped the conversation to find a passage in his book and read it. And Joe was losing it that probably the third time he did it.
Terrible. And how do you follow up that question, especially if you have a really perfected question or if you have a really perfected answer? What is the host supposed to say? Now you've created imposter syndrome for yourself and the host because they're like, damn, how do I follow that answer up? And you get some sort of weird, oh, that was a good answer type response instead of a follow-up question, which is what you really want. You want to create a dialogue between you and the host. And the best way to do that is by not scripting your answer. Create bullet points. It's a conversation, not an audiobook. Come on.
Okay, so we've done all this prep work. It's getting a little closer to the podcast. What's the third step to being a really great guest?
Step number 3, test your equipment. Sam, I got to tell you, I was preparing a guest on a prep call, and the guest showed up with the most amazing equipment. He had the Joe Rogan mic. He had pretty decent lighting and a good camera. But guess what? His mic didn't work. He had a very complicated system, and he wasn't able, even after 5 to 10 minutes, he wasn't able to solve it on the prep call. Now, I'm a pretty forgiving and reasonable and responsible and flexible host, but if that had been a time-crunched recording situation, he would have had to cancel the podcast interview. He could not get his equipment running. Sometimes you can get equipment that's a little too complicated for the situation, and you run into an issue where you don't know how to use it. So make sure you're not that guy, and you test your equipment beforehand. If you're going to do a prep call, test it before your prep call. Don't unbox your microphone in front of your host for the first time. This is not an unboxing video on YouTube. This is a podcast prep call or recording. Make sure you've tested it beforehand. Well, how do you do that? What's the best way to test your equipment beforehand? Let me give you 3 simple phrases to remember. Frame it, record it, watch it. First up, frame it. Create yourself a dress rehearsal for the podcast. That means logging into whatever platform you're going to use to record the podcast and check yourself out. How do you look in the video? Do you have proper lighting? How does your microphone placement look? And finally, what do you sound like? In order to do that, I want you to hop on this dress rehearsal and hit record. Bing, I hit record, and guess what? Now I can go back and look at myself. It's not enough just to look at yourself in the preview pane of whatever app you're using. You want to record it. So first off, frame it. Second, record it. And then finally, third, watch it. Go back and open up that MP4. See what you look like in the video. Hear what you sound like. Guess what? Sometimes you can have this thing plugged in, the light can be on, and nothing's being recorded. That's the thing with microphones. And if you don't have a microphone, listen to yourself. Laptop mics are terrible, so listen to yourself in advance. And if you need to upgrade your sound, your video, your lighting, do that before your prep call. Do that before your podcast recording. Frame it, record it, watch it. One of the reasons why testing your equipment is so important is that not only do you want to show up and have it working, but also your host may or may not know to troubleshoot for you. Your host may not be as experienced as you think, and they may let you record with terrible audio. Don't let this happen. Take responsibility on yourself. Check your audio, check your video, because your host may or may not do it. This might be a good time to upgrade your gear. If you watch your recording and you hear terrible audio, don't just accept it, fix it. Sam, do we have a good list to share with everyone?
Absolutely. Click the link in the corner to grab our gear list.
Okay, real quick. The final step in preparing yourself for a great podcast is to prepare to promote. What does that mean? That means prepare yourself and your team to promote the episode. In order to promote the episode, you're going to need to find out some information. When do they expect the episode to air? Do they have any assets and collateral they can share with you? Ask your host. A great time for this is on a prep call. If you're in a big organization with a PR team, make sure you check with the PR or comms team that you can record this podcast. So there we go. We've talked about the 4 things you need to do to prepare to be a great guest on a podcast. Next, let's talk about what you need to do while you're on a podcast to be a great guest. If you've done your preparation in advance, there's only 3 things I want you to think about when you're on that podcast. First and foremost, be engaging. Oftentimes being a guest is all about talking and talking quite a bit. But a great guest is also a good listener. Oftentimes, the host is going to help you get your message across by sharing a story or by asking the question in a specific way. So pay attention to how your host is interacting with you and be engaging. Play along. Go with your host. Go with them where they're going. And use stories. Use real world stories and examples to illustrate your point. Again, don't feel like you have to teach a class. It's edutainment. You're teaching, but you're also entertaining. Next, be authentic. Answer truthfully and answer from your own experience. And if you don't know the answer, it's okay to say you're not really sure, that you don't really encounter that very often. You don't want to try to lie or make things up. Believe it or not, the audience and the host can tell very quickly if you're making up an answer. So just talk from your soul, man. Tell them what you know. Tell them what you believe in. Make sure that you're speaking from a position of expertise and passion when you answer questions. Don't go into the land of make-believe. Don't try to make things up. Answer from what you know. Be authentic. Be yourself. Speak from the heart. Don't try to sound like someone else. Don't put on a teeny weeny beanie and try to be Gary Vee. You're not Gary Vee, but guess what? Gary Vee's cool. Let him be him. Be you. You're cool too. Being a podcast guest and being authentic builds credibility and trust. And if you're looking to get more customers for your company or product, that's the way to do it. Build that trust by being authentic. Final thing to think about when you're on that podcast, the lights are on, the microphone's recording. Man, have fun. Have fun with this thing. Don't get so worked up, just like you didn't script things out in advance. Don't worry about having the perfect interview. You're not trying to have the perfect interview. This podcast, you're not shooting for the perfect interview. You're shooting for the perfect conversation. And the good news is you've already done the preparation and you've already got the right mindset to have an awesome conversation. So enjoy, have a good time, laugh it up. Remember, people want some edutainment, so don't just keep it all straight-laced and boring, answering questions with a question. No, have fun with it. Go crazy. Raise your voice a little bit. Speak emphatically. Have fun, man. Have a good time. You're going to be authentically you anyways, so don't stress. Don't stress about how you're going to do. Be yourself and have fun. So listen, you're about to do a podcast. Be engaging, authentic, and have some fun. If you're having fun, your host is going to pick up on that energy, and you're going to have a great conversation.
Quick. Okay, Casey, you've got the recording. It's gone great. You've had an awesome conversation with a ton of great insights. You've given a bunch of great content to the host. What do you do next to get that message to as many people as possible?
All right, so here's what we got to do. Make sure you have permission to share this episode on behalf of your company. So if you're in a large organization and you have a PR team, make sure you check with them to ensure that the episode is ready to go live. If you've already checked in advance, your PR and comms team is going to be ready to check that episode out. Oftentimes, PR or comms teams want to listen to the episode and check it out to make sure you're good. Don't get yourself in hot water with your enterprise, your organization. Make sure to have your PR team check it out and make sure to have them give their blessing on your episode coming out. Guess what? They'll probably promote the heck out of it too. When your episode goes live, you want to share that thing on social media. Use your social channels all across the universe to promote your episode. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, you name it, wherever you're at, Instagram, share on your favorite platforms, especially where you have a following. You may have a lot of people following you on LinkedIn and not even realize it. Make sure you post those links everywhere you can. No one's going to ever criticize you for posting too many links about your exciting episode. We're excited for you. We want to see those pictures of your dogs and cats. Well, you can overshare pictures of dogs and cats, especially newborn babies. You can't overshare your link for that podcast. We want to hear what you said. When you do share your link to the podcast episode, make sure you highlight your favorite part or your favorite takeaway, or guess what? That key message and story. Highlight that in your social sharing to really give it a kick.
Yeah, and you can use video assets to increase engagement. You can write great copy around that. You can use quotes and graphics that show those quotes, anything to make that more engaging. And no one's going to care if you're oversharing about great content.
Ask for the edited video from your podcast host. Get permission from them to cross-promote that episode. Throw it up on your channel, and even better, get the embed code from the podcast host, and you can embed that podcast interview on your website. Great way to get additional views and attention for that great conversation you just did. Sam, this has been great. I've had so much fun chatting with you today about one of my favorite topics, being an awesome guest on a podcast. I'm often a host on a podcast, and I tell you what, if you do all the things we just discussed, I can't wait to interview you. You're going to be awesome.